Welcome to Veritas Group's webinar, Are You Being Crushed by the Metrics? Today's webinar features Jeff Schreifels, Principal of Veritas Group, Richard Perry, Founder of Veritas Group, and Marnie Fauser, CEO and President of the United Way of Central Illinois. Together, they have decades of experience in fundraising and nonprofit leadership. Welcome, Jeff, Richard, and Marnie.
Hey, thanks, Karen. Great to see you. This is going to be a fun webinar.
It is.
And it's controversial too, which is good. So just a little background. As you can see, I've been doing this for quite a bit of time, and both on the mid and major gift side for many years, and also on the direct response side. So I think, and Richard, you have the same background. So we come at it a full approach of from the very beginning of a $10 donor all the way to $1 million and plus donor. So that's a little bit about me, Richard.
Yeah, I've been doing this a long time too. I mean, I'm about the ancient person on the webinar here, but hopefully I'll survive till the end. But I've been a development director, so I've been a frontline person. I've been a major gift officer, and then of course been involved in a direct marketing agency. So all the analysis and direct marketing principles. I mean, we've been into that over the years, and of course, most recently in the last 10 or 15 years, the Veritas Group and major gifts. So it's been a journey, but metrics, this whole thing here, Jeff, is just one of the most fascinating topics.
Yes.
And it creates security for people if you do it right.
Yeah.
And it's a total nightmare if you do it wrong. So that's what we're going to talk about today. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. Marnie.
Hello, I'm so glad to be here today. I don't have near as much experience as the two of you when it comes to fundraising, but my background started in coaching. So when I look at leadership in my position now, I really look at the coaching angle of you need to coach your team and your problem solving and coaching with donors to reach a goal that all of you are on the same kind of page about. So I'm really excited to be here today.
Awesome. This is going to be fun. All right. Now, before we get started on today's topic, I just wanted to share a bit about who we are at Veritas. I know some of you on the call may be pretty familiar with us, but for those who aren't, we are passionately relationship focused and grounded in a data-driven approach. This dynamic is critical to the system, structure, and strategy that we have found to be successful in mid, major, and planned giving programs. And we have a vision to help nonprofits of all sizes create a culture and approach to fundraising that will help you create transformational relationships with your donors. We accomplish this vision through a focused strategy and approach. Over the years, we've worked with thousands of nonprofits through our consulting work and online academy, and we've analyzed millions of donor records. This has framed our strategy and helped us identify the key pillars to success, including creating buy-in across your organization, a focus on donor and value attrition, improving revenue per donor, increasing net revenue to your programs, and being committed to meaningful relationships with your donors. And we've gotten to work with some pretty phenomenal organizations over the years who we've partnered with to create more transformational relationships with our donors.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it, Jeff?
It sure has.
Now, there's a problem brewing. I mean, before the pandemic, there were a number of challenges facing the nonprofit sector. I mean, and I think probably each of you has experienced that. And they've been persistent, like donor and value attrition and fundraiser turnover. And then, as you know, the pandemic caused many nonprofits to pivot and adjust how they'd been approaching staffing and donor relationships and events and so much more. While there was a lot of difficulty during that time, we really did see some positive changes around how activity was measured and how organizations evaluated success in major gifts. But unfortunately, we're beginning to see some signs of organizations kind of regressing back to the old systems that don't serve the donor. And they don't serve the fundraisers either, the frontline fundraisers, or even the organization's mission. So here are some of the red flags that we're seeing more frequently in the sector. So first of all, leadership is moving back to traditional activity-based metrics. So you do these things and we're going to measure how many of them you do. Fundraisers are being excluded from conversations about strategy and fundraising plans, which is really weird to me that that happens, but it does. And there's increased pressure to just get the money and put new donors or prospects with high wealth capacity ratings onto caseloads without qualifying them first. Metrics that are being set up by people who don't understand them.
Mhm.
And then fundraising turnover, I mean, it's really, really getting worse. And organizations are struggling to find and hire good candidates because they're just leaving the sector.
Yeah. So there's a lot of problems out there, but today's webinar, we're going to focus just on the metrics related concerns we're seeing in the sector. So we've heard some pretty outrageous story recently about metrics, and what we're hearing boils down to leadership that's concerned about revenue. So what they're doing is looking for a quick fix that they can think will drive more revenue. And for some organizations, this means bringing in more activity-oriented metrics and goals that put the fundraiser into more of a transactional mindset instead of a relationship-focused one. Marnie, what are you seeing?
That's a great question. And I had talked to a couple MGOs, and one of the things that they said is their leadership shared, you have to make 50 calls a week. And I'm thinking if you're a major gift fundraiser, you have capacity of a caseload. And if that's around 150, you're calling those donors every few weeks. And so it is so transactional that you're not taking into consideration the donor and their schedule and how they like to be connected. And I think that's really concerning when we're making internal decisions about how we want to do it and not making the donor part of this journey together. Another one was a major gift officer. Every email that she needed to send out needed to be approved. I think that's a challenge with leadership too. I know I don't have time to manage that. I need to hire good people and trust them that they know how to connect with donors. So that's a couple things that I'm hearing. Yeah.
And you know, it's interesting about the 50 calls, or gosh, I've been with fundraisers who say we have to do 35 face-to-face a month. And so what happens is when they're focusing on these activity metrics, that's what they, you know, they're just trying at the end of the month, just trying to do a bunch of these just so that they can make the metrics to check it off, or else they'll get dinged right at the end of the month.
Yeah, never mind that they're not talking to the right people, or that it's not effective, that it's the right strategy or anything like that. I mean, it's a very sad thing. And then you don't get the results that you want to get, and then you're in trouble because you didn't get the results.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So a significant challenge we see in nonprofits is that they're still focusing on outdated metrics. And for many organizations, the metrics in the black section you see on the screen are still their current standards. But at Veritas, we believe by shifting to metrics that focus on the fundraiser and meaningfully engaging their donors is a much better way to gauge success and help your fundraisers move out of transactional giving mindset.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about our metrics and some of the key areas that we focus on and that you should be measuring yourself. So first is staying committed to working the plan. You know, Jeff, you've often said that if you work the plan, then what happens with giving is kind of out of your hands. I mean, you've done everything you can to reach your goals, but that assumes a good plan.
Right.
And so this is true, which is why it's an important point of evaluation for our major gifts program. So do you have a plan for every qualified donor on the caseload?
And let me add to that, Richard. The only way you can actually look to see if you're working the plan, if you're a manager, is by actually having an ongoing discussion with your major gift officer and seeing what they're doing. So it needs management.
Yeah. So doing the plan is based on the passions and interests of that specific donor.
Right.
And making sure that that plan is right. That's what we mean about the right plan. I mean, you could have a plan that's wrong and working it, and that could be wrong. You also want to analyze how each donor on the caseload is performing year over year. I mean, some donors will decrease in their giving, but others will increase. And the key right here is to know the story of why that giving is changing and to stay focused on building the relationship for the long term. Another big focus for us is meaningful connections, and we're going to talk about that more in a little bit. And then we kind of look at overall revenue. So what do we mean by overall revenue? Well, it's the sum of all the goals set for each individual on the caseload, and then it's cash flowed. And by cash flow, we say the goal is basically when do we have an expectation that that money is going to come in? It's not really anything different than that. It's not a number that some leader or manager is handed down, which is what usually happens. I mean, Jeff, you and I have heard this over and over again. Well, you need to get 15% more than you did last year.
Right.
Well, where'd that number come from? I mean, so it's not that. It's not that number that handed down. No, it's what the qualified donors on your caseload can deliver, not the wishful thinking of some manager. So this is a very important and practical point.
Yeah.
Next, it's about evaluating performance. What's the current fiscal year goal and the goal per donor?
Mm-hmm.
What's the current fiscal year to date revenue per donor? What's the prior fiscal cumulative revenue per donor? In other words, what did that donor do last time or last year? What's the prior fiscal year revenue for the same donors? And then what's the prior fiscal year revenue? What would it have been without a managed caseload? Because that we're trying to measure exactly what's going on in terms of if you're not managing. I mean, we see a tremendous difference in value nutrition.
Yeah.
If that's not happening right.
Yep.
So when we say overall goal and evaluating performance, that's what we mean by that. Now, here's the whole story on meaningful connections. At its core, a meaningful connection is connected to something the donor actually values. It's got to come back to the donor's passions and interests. I mean, that's the whole basis. If it doesn't, then it's not really meaningful. A meaningful connection's got to be, where the donor takes an action, says something that reveals a deeper interest in the organization or in the project or program, uncovers new information about the donor, or fulfills the move the development officer has pre-planned for the donor. So these meaningful connections are really strategic and they're just not a coincidence that happened there. It's a strategic move or action that happens.
Mm-hmm.
You'll know when you've experienced a meaningful connection with a donor. You'll also know when you haven't. So what we're saying here is that if you're uncertain about the connection and about whether it was meaningful or not, then it probably wasn't meaningful. So a meaningful connection, just to explain this further, can be like face-to-face, in an email exchange, over the phone. And to clarify, simply seeing a donor or emailing a donor or talking on the phone, like Marnie was saying, okay, I've been through my 50 calls. That's not a meaningful connection. Or, being at an event with a donor does not constitute a meaningful connection. It's an action.
Right.
Where the development officer has moved the donor in the direction of fulfilling that donor's passions and interests and helping increase the revenue to the organization. So we feel really strongly about this. At Veritas, we believe that tracking meaningful connections is a much better approach to quantifying a major gift officer's or a frontline fundraisers officer's performance, because it's more donor-centered and allows the major gift officer to deepen a relationship with the donor based on the donor's communication preference, not the organization's preference. I mean, this is very, very critical.
Yeah. And Marnie, how are you helping your major gift officers build that relationship of trust and stewardship of donors?
I think it's exactly what Richard was saying. It is really based on how the donor wants to be connected to you.
Mm-hmm.
And we really take into consideration how often they want to hear from us and how they want to hear from us. So if it is we have some donors that they love texting.
Yeah.
So that shouldn't have to be a 50 calls if they want you to text them. They're not going to pick up your call. And I really think it's looking at that caseload and problem solving. So that's kind of the language we will use is we're problem solving together. And we each have a role on the team.
Yeah.
As a major gift officer, as the donor, as the organization, we each have a role. So we're going to problem solve together and develop that plan around that specific donor. And I think when you're talking about developing that plan, it takes time. And as in leadership, you have to be patient and allow your major gift officers to develop the plan with the donor because they know them at a deeper level. They know what they're passionate about and what they care about.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be a one size fits all. You're going to have to be unique and really listen to what the donor is saying and pick up on those cues.
Awesome.
Yeah, you're right on. And speaking of working the plan, I mean, this is a KPI that is actually not as quantitative, but it's something that you and your supervisor, like Marnie was saying, should be in communication about. You need to be staying on track with your communication plan and managing those relationships. And this can be really challenging, especially if you have a split role or you get regularly pulled into other tasks and so on. You may need to create a scheduling system for yourself, like block scheduling, to help you ensure you're completing the steps needed to work the plan for every donor on the caseload. And if other things are getting in the way, then talk to your supervisor about how to move things off your plate so you can stay focused on your caseload. I mean, Jeff, this happens a lot. It'd be interesting to hear how Marnie thinks about it. But this whole idea of the frontline fundraiser manages a caseload, but also you've got to do these other 4 things.
Yeah.
And it's a real problem in our industry, in the sector.
Right. So Marnie, how are you keeping your folks focused? And then how are you implementing what we call the Veritas way with your folks?
Okay, that's great too. So we actually use the DEP concept, and so she is building her caseload and developing her plan, what it's going to look like. I meet with her every week, and we do a check-in and kind of what did you learn about the donor? What were you excited about? What were they excited about? And really, okay, now build out this plan. And the biggest thing is it needs to be a little bit flexible. I can give one example at a MGO, and the donor's wife was diagnosed with cancer. And this is a 5-figure gift donor. And at that moment, we shifted gears and said, how can we help you? You have been a loyal donor to us. What can we do for you? And we knew that gift was probably going to change because their life had shifted. And I think having a plan, but also being flexible to understand how the donor's life has changed. If someone lost a job, don't just keep trying to hit that end goal that you have. If you become a partner with them, it will pay dividends because you've actually taken the time to care about them as a human being. But we have the plan where we have the YMAD touches, and that we're integrating different pieces, soft touches with birthday cards or Christmas cards, but also making those meaningful connections with what Richard was talking about, making sure we're moving the donor to problem solve together.
Yeah. So good. Hey, just so you know that our people are listening, there's a couple acronyms that Marnie threw out there. I want you to just make sure. So DEP means Donor Engagement Plan. This is the document that Veritas and many of our clients use to plan for each of their donors, for revenue and for their strategic plan. So that's a way to keep your major gift officers focused. And then she also said YMAD, which is an acronym for You Made a Difference. So it's a way to, it's those pieces or touch points that you send to your donor that shows impact. So just so you all know what those two acronyms.
And you see those acronyms on the screen right there, because it's like you see the YMADs and
right.
And the thing that you see on your screen is a mini donor engagement plan. I mean, it's a lot more complex than that.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff, for saying that. I was speaking in our alphabet soup. But
we do it all the time too. It's hard, not everyone knows our internal speak.
Yeah. So caseload activities is, I mean, this is an important thing. There's a number of different areas that we look at in terms of caseload activity to see how things are progressing and to gauge if the activity is meaningful. And these are some of the measurements available on the donor engagement plan. that will allow you and your supervisor to track and manage caseload activity as well. I think the other thing that we've got to mention here, Jeff, is the plan for transformational donors. So what do we mean by transformational donors? That we've always said, Jeff, and we found this to be true, that in every qualified caseload, with every single organization we've ever worked with, there are always those 2 to 3 or 4 donors that, if they're treated properly, can give transformationally.
Yeah.
And give
So
transformationally.
I mean, typically money wise, it's somewhere in 6, 7, 8 figure type of gifts.
They are.
But it's also, it's transformational in the sense that that gift would help your organization tremendously. It would take it to another place, but also transform the donor, right? Because that type of gift has a huge value to the donor, that they're making such a difference in changing the world through that gift. So
yeah,
yes.
So the reason we bring this up and why it's an important metric for us and thing to be measured is, okay, are you actually looking for those donors in the caseload? And are you creating a transformation? So it's actually, it's like, it's not listed in our metrics, but it's an important point that we always emphasize, that you need to create a transformational giving plan. And it's got to be a key priority for the fundraiser. So these plans take time because they're highly detailed and specifically tailored to specific donors, and it's going to be executed, like I said earlier, with just a handful of top donors. And there needs to be a good rhythm of communication and engagement with the donor to build trust and strengthen the donor's inclination and affinity for your organization. So this should be part of how your fundraiser is working their plan.
Exactly. Good stuff. Okay. Why is all this evaluation important? Here's why. So here's the value. Viewing giving in this way helps you stay on top of the donor giving every month. That means there's no surprises, and it can have a significant impact on donor value attrition because you're more aware of individual donors. Donor value attrition is what I'm going to show you right now. So look at number 4 here. The donor number 4 gave $10,000 in year 1, and by year 4, they're now giving $4,100. So we lost $5,900 in value over that time. That's what we mean by value attrition. The donor is still giving, but they're giving less. And the question then we all have is why? What is happening? And in more cases than not is we're not taking care of the donor. Here's another way to look at this. This is one portfolio of 150 donors. And in year 1, this portfolio brought in $1.9 million in revenue. The same donors by year 3 were now giving $584,000, or we lost almost 70% of their value from year 1 to year 3. This is one portfolio. We see this over and over again. Typically, we see between 40 and 60% value attrition year over year.
Hey Jeff, I remember, you remember this. I was actually in the meeting when we presented this information. And if you look at line 4, line 4, the $60,000 giver.
Yeah.
We asked, okay, whose donor is that? And the major gift officer said, well, that's my donor. So what happened? And they didn't have an answer.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that. And it was like, okay, you got to know the answer to these things. This is important. Why these people kind of went away.
Exactly. That was a pure case of why that donor started giving less, because no one knew to really connect with that donor. And that's somebody that gave $60,000.
Right.
It's a tremendous gift.
It was.
So
amazing.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So we're kind of beating on this meaningful connections thing, but this is why it's important. Why do we care so much about it? So we've shared about meaningful connections a bit earlier in the presentation, but now we want to talk about what they really look like and why we think meaningful connections are a difference maker for the fundraising efforts. So first of all, let's just get clear that how we think about the role of the frontline fundraiser. We believe that role is to be the bridge between the world's greatest needs and the donor's passions and interests. Every donor has a certain set of passions and interests, and they really, really want to express those through their giving. And so our role is to be that bridge to make that happen.
That's right. That's why it's such an amazing job.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in order to truly create meaningful connections, there are 3 things that must be in place. First, the donor must actually be qualified. And this means the donor not only met a certain criteria, but has actually agreed to a two-way relationship with you, which means the donor has actually responded to your outreach.
Yes.
You must know or be committed to learning your donor's passions and interests. I mean, this is what it's all about. It's okay if you are still learning this and being curious about understanding your donor's connection to the mission, but if you aren't seeking this out, then you need to do that before you can meaningfully engage. And lastly, you need to understand the donor's communication preferences. How does the donor actually want to connect and engage with you?
Well, it's interesting on that point, Jeff. Marnie, you were bringing up the whole thing about a donor wants to text.
Yeah.
Right. And it's sort of like, okay, well, is text enough?
Right.
I mean, did your major gift officer basically say, well, shouldn't I talk to them on the phone, or I mean, shouldn't I do something? I mean, just a text? I mean, really? They're all
Well, speaking of that example, is the donor confirmed to a very high level 5-figure gift right under a 6-figure gift via text. We didn't need to put together a whole, basket of goodies for this donor when they just wanted to communicate via text. And sometimes that's easier. And I think we have to honor the donor in that way.
Absolutely. Now, if you don't know your donor's communication preferences, here are a few easy ways to help you identify them that the fundraisers we work with have been successful with. So be sure to regularly be checking in and offering new ways to engage. Maybe you spoke to a donor a year ago who said she prefers emails.
Mm-hmm.
You are starting to text more. You can still offer that to a donor as an option. That will help you learn if the donor is interested in this other way of receiving information. You can send a survey to your donors asking for their preferences. Be sure to also pay attention to how the donor responds. If your donor often sends text messages to your phone calls, then the donor may prefer that communication method.
Mm-hmm.
So use a little EQ, right?
Yeah,
Try
exactly.
different things and see what seems to be best. You may want to occasionally reach out in a different way to connect with a donor. The only exception is if the donor has explicitly said, hey, don't communicate in this particular way.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, you can just ask what the donor prefers. Donors appreciate when you are thinking about them and their preferences, so you're likely to get a good answer by just being curious. Now, here's some potential language you could use to identify a donor's communication preferences. You could be saying, look, I'm visiting this program next week and would be happy to send you some photo updates. Would you prefer that in an email, or should I text those? Give the donor some options, or asking them to Zoom, or do they want to be in person, or can I send it by email? Let the donor tell you how they want to be communicated with.
So we were going to talk with Marnie about that point, how to build a relationship of trust and steward donors. I mean, do you have any comments on that, Marnie?
Well, I think when you start talking about meaningful connections, I think leadership kind of struggles with what does that mean? When the MGO is trying to explain it, leadership can get really like, what does that mean? Isn't it easier just to pull the report out of your CRM to say you made 50 calls? And I think it's just harder for leaders to kind of to gauge success to their and share that with their board. But I think developing those relationships and inviting donors to different opportunities that you can engage. And again, I always go back to problem solving. If they want to help you solve the problem, they're going to start becoming engaged. And we can't worry about, did they talk to us just once a year? If they are still becoming engaged to solve a problem, and you're looking at the data and you're looking at that year over year revenue and they're growing, that's success. That's success right there. And then just really defining that meaningful connection of moving that donor kind of through the process together. And I know for MGOs that can be a struggle. I have MGOs that have different leadership, and it is make the 50 calls, just the very transactional pieces. And my MGO now, it is like, tell me the story. What do you know about them? And then think about different ways to connect. If they were awarded something for helping another nonprofit, connect them. Say, oh my gosh, look at the great work you're doing in this community.
Yeah.
Acknowledge the work that they're doing, and then look for ways to volunteer with them. And it is harder to manage. It is harder to pull down the stats on that, but the end result is going to be so much greater from a financial. When I had 3 MGOs, we went from a 1.3 million total caseload to 4.65 in 4 years, just by following a plan and sticking to that plan.
Cool.
Awesome.
So how do you know? Let's get into this whole business about how you know if it's meaningful. So there's 4 things. There's 4 things that we consider when looking at an interaction to see if it's actually meaningful. You can know a donor interaction is meaningful if you've gained new information about the donor, like their passions and interests, or the drivers behind the passions and interests, or their communication preference. You've moved the donor closer to a gift. You've helped the donor get more involved in the organization. And it was a connection that was part of a pre-planned strategy for the donor.
Yep.
I mean, I think you've talked about all about the meaningful connections, Marnie, right? I mean, any more you want to add?
No, I just think just having that plan and following it and trusting in that.
Cool. Okay. So here's some examples. Let's just consider what it actually looks like for a moment. There's some ideas that we've heard from fundraisers who are out there creating meaningful connections with their donors. So let's say you can share a text update from a program and you're visiting with donors who give to it and are passionate about that program. That's one thing you could do. Or you could schedule a video call with your CEO so your donors can hear the latest organization news. You could do a FaceTime tour of a program that the donor is interested in, but maybe can't visit in person. Or, you could share a video from someone who was directly impacted by the donor's gift. That's been a very powerful way to go. Or you could have a phone call with the donor. This one may not be new, but it's a great way you can use technology, that is your phone, just to basically stay connected. If they actually have that as a communication preference. So let me just share some stories from fundraisers we work with to put this in perspective. So one was a Zoom experience in an event. So the client is an MGO at the university and had several fraternity brothers, alumni on his caseload that he was planning on engaging with a fraternity reunion event in April. And so the event during COVID was canceled. So the client arranged a Zoom reunion call for the frat brothers, and even them showing them how to use Zoom and all that stuff, because some of them didn't know how to do it. And he shared with them some different photos of places around campus and showed them how to make their own backgrounds on Zoom, et cetera. And the reunion actually lasted for an hour and a half. There were some really great conversations, and he answered a bunch of questions. And as a result, a few of the frat brothers individually increased their giving, as well as there was an additional gift from a frat alumni chapter. So that's one. Another example that we have is a meeting with the president. The president carries a caseload of 1.8 million, invited 10 plus donors to a Zoom group call to update them early on in a COVID because they had a COVID stay at home during that period. And most of them joined the call. The founder kind of gave a short message, and then the president, a short state of the organization update. And they did not have guests use the camera, but they did have open microphones for questions. And that was a really successful way to approach it as well. WHYY, which is a client of ours in Philadelphia, a public media station, scheduled a discussion with 2 of the top Philadelphia radio personalities and invited donors to join a video call. 20 of them did, and it went fairly well. MGOs were on the call with their donors, and they followed up with their donors. Another one was a recorded video touch points. A client in Canada who runs K-12 schools in Africa and South America has used these short recorded videos that are emailed to talk with donors and keep them updated on the situation in the nations where they serve and where the donor is interested in. And they continue to get good feedback on that. Another one is like keeping the donor in mind. Here we have a story of an MGO who was driving to work and heard a story on the radio about the poet E.E. Cummings. And if you all know about E.E. Cummings, he always wrote in everything in lowercase. And the MGO immediately thought, oh, I have a donor on the caseload she's been trying to get, and I've been trying to engage with, who does the same in email. They're all lowercase. So when the MGO got back to the office, found the link to the story, sent it to the donor with a simple note. I heard this and thought of you, and that was it. Now, on the surface, that may not appear to be meaningful, but the donor's response showed that it was. There was an immediate reply. Communication changed from short, terse, long lags between very warm and friendly and rapid, discussions, and a discussion about a gift of land and cash that had stalled for over a year, wrapped up in a matter of weeks. Why? Because the donor felt she was seen and heard as a person. I mean, there's stories and stories like this. Marnie, can you share some
that's a beautiful story. There was a donor that with technology, it was a struggle, but really wanted to be part of an event when you think about COVID and social isolation, and some of our donors are older. And you make the executive decision to say, I want you to go there to their house, because they were willing to allow them in and help them. And so they were able to join in via Zoom together, but it was helping teach them just how to use the technology. And that increased that relationship, because you were helping them to solve a problem. How do I use this technology and still feel connected to what is going on? And it's really thinking one-to-one. How can I help that donor during a time that they need help? And it advances what we're trying to do with the problem solving in our mission. And there's so many great stories, but it truly comes down to, Richard and Jeff, both what you have said. It's about connecting and being authentic with your donor. What are they passionate about? What do they care about? And if we take the time and say, I'm not just trying to get through the tasks of the day, I'm trying to get to know you and let you know that I care about you in this journey. That's the beautiful piece, I think, in the world of development.
Yep. Good stuff. Now, let's just talk a little bit about what a meaningful connection does not look like. Part of the misunderstanding here is just human nature. It's easier to talk about ourselves than to be active listeners. I mean, that's how we are. And in order to truly have a meaningful connection with your donor, you need to push past this tendency and stay focused on the donor's passions and interests, and regularly consider if what you're doing and what you're saying and how you're interacting is truly honoring to the donor. Now, here are some real situations that we've encountered that have happened that illustrate what is not a meaningful connection. We've had some fundraisers track face-to-face meetings. It's like Marnie's 50 meetings or 50 calls.
And just so you know, Richard, those aren't mine. Just so you
know.
No,
I know. I'm talking about the story. But we've had some fundraisers, track these, and when all they did was say, so they write it down as a face-to-face meeting, but really what they did was just say hi at an event. Or we've had some fundraisers track email communication with donors that looks like they had a one-to-one conversation, but really it was just a mass email that was sent out. And we've seen the same thing happen with phone calls, when the fundraiser just left a voicemail or called and didn't get the donor on the phone or didn't connect, or left no message. Phone call attempt is not the same as an actual phone call. I mean, that should be obvious, but there you go. So
I've got a quick example here from Barbara. I'm going to jump in. She says, speaking of calling donors, when you call a donor, for example, to thank him or her for a recent gift, we were told that you cannot consider an action closed in our system if we have just left a voicemail. How many voicemail attempts can I leave a voicemail to thank a donor? I'm worried that I might bombard the donor with a lot of thank you calls at the same time. I understand we need to build relationships. So what if I Left voicemail to a donor 3 times now. Would love to hear your thoughts and suggestions. That's a great example.
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
mean, if you've left the left messages and not had an interaction, I don't know that that would move the thing forward unless
Yeah, but
huh?
yeah.
Yeah, but
Well,
the issue is
it
that they're
sounds
not
like
considered closed
it
until they
sounds like they're saying,
Yeah.
well, if you don't get an interaction on the thank you, you don't get credit or something. And so the person's trying to leave all these voicemail messages thanking them and not getting a hold of them. Well, the other side of this is, hey, maybe the donor doesn't want to talk to you, right? You know, if
Well, I
you've
mean,
tried 3 times.
that's usually it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's usually what's going on. And so that's sort of the big clue or cue that you got to
Yeah.
pay attention to. What do you think, Marnie?
If it was in Karen, I'm gonna kind of assume, but it sounds like it was the closing of the gift, that they didn't get the credit for closing the gift unless they made personal contact with the donor. But I think
Yeah.
leaving a voice message thanking them is great. Doing it more than just those couple times sounds a little bit over the top. Again, it's becoming more about the organization and less about the donor. Just keep it in your mind the next time you see them. Go, hey, I left you a message, but I really wanted to let you know how great of an
Mhm.
impact you have made in making sure that that you make a difference. Share that right there, and this is how your gift made a difference. You can do that right there in person when you see them, even if it is at an event that's maybe not yours, but you see them
Yeah.
out. You can say, hey, I left you a
Mhm.
message, I just really wanted to thank you, and then
Yeah.
you can tell a little bit of the story. And for me, if you've thanked them, you've closed the gift, and now we're into stewardship mode.
Yeah. See,
Mhm.
everyone wants Marnie as their manager because she's smart and she understands this. So
Mhm.
this is one of those crazy things, right? The metrics that the organization gets in their head. Well, it sounds good on the surface, right? That in order to get credit, you have to close the loop and the thank you has to be face to face, or, they have to acknowledge this.
Mhm. Mhm.
That seems like on the surface, it makes sense, but you can see how ridiculous it gets now.
Yep.
Because now the MGO is bugging the donor by leaving all these voice messages.
Which
Because
could have a very negative effect.
yes,
Yes.
exactly.
I mean,
Yeah,
so all of these interactions that we've just talked about, I mean, they will and they do happen in your work with donors, but most likely if you're doing it that way, and in terms of what I've listed as that are not meaningful connections, then they're not meeting the criteria for a meaningful connection.
yeah. All right. So here's some things to consider here. Fortunately, not all databases are made equal. You'll want to work with your database manager and supervisor to consider what functionality exists and how you
Mhm.
might want to set up the databases. If your database already allows you to track actions, tasks, and/or activities, then you'll want to see if you can modify or expand the values allowed or add a subcode to modify the action code. We'll
Mhm.
talk more about this in a moment. And you'll also want to consider how you are tracking performance as you update or revise codes to ensure the focus is on meaningful connections.
Yep.
And you need to consider who needs to be involved in the conversation. Obviously, the database manager has to be included, but there may be other people who use your database tracking that should be brought in. Work with your supervisor and the database manager to evaluate this and get the necessary people in the room. So if your system is already tracking actions, tasks, activities, work with your database manager to modify or expand the values allowed. And some databases have allowed for a checkoff box, and these are 2 different approaches depending on how your database system works. Both allow you to clearly see which actions are meaningful connections and which are not. And
Mhm.
Marnie, why don't you help us? How are you tracking these things in your system?
So there's 2 ways. We're working out of kind of 2 systems. We have our major gift officer, her plan with her donors, and we do that in Excel, right? But there's
Yeah,
a lot of future pieces to that, but there's also past, because you have your fiscal year giving located in there, but you have your goals and all those connections. And then we're actually changing CRMs. So we're building this out right now. So we are able to start tracking, not just I
Mhm.
sent an email. We do want to know that. But
Yeah.
the really, I think, cool thing is my whole team is part of this conversation.
Yeah.
My marketing person, my program person, our finance person, and development, and myself, we all have conversations about how our CRM is going to work, because we all have to work as a team in the system,
Good.
and then going through and tracking by meaningful connections. So then I can segment out where are we at from an email standpoint or phone calls, but where are we at on the meaningful side, because that's on the major gift side. But maybe the email, I want to look at some marketing pieces out of our database as a whole and what that looks like and what they've asked, what the donor has asked for. So that's a little bit how we're doing it, but it is a whole team conversation. It's not just going to be me saying, this is how we're going to do it. I need everybody that's involved in all those pieces to kind of come to the table so it functions for the organization.
Hey, folks that are listening to this is the CEO of a nonprofit. This is the way she is talking about how to manage process,
Mhm.
people. And I just wanted to acknowledge that this is a rarity that we find. So Marnie, everything you're saying is
Yeah.
like music to our ears. It's like, it's amazing hearing this from a CEO of a
Mhm.
nonprofit
No, very
that's
nice.
talking
Yeah.
like this.
And I think there's data to back it up, because I implemented this plan with MGOs. I've switched roles and I've watched I've heard the caseload go down, and it's disheartening because we're caring about the donors, but I'm also excited in kind of this role now is to build this up and really hopefully get other leaders to say it is hard, trust your front line. And it's constant communication, as you both know, right? It's constant communication with your whole team.
That's right. That's good stuff. All right, let's talk about this donor engagement plan thing and how to keep track of meaningful connections. We do ultimately recommend that you track this in the database, and you can use the donor engagement plan for planning and for a quick view of how you're tracking. And as always, any actions that are completed need to be in your database. Now, Marnie, maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the challenges around the DEP and your database and how you track the plan versus the actual, how you, the things you implemented and put into the database, like when you talk to a donor or something. But maybe you could talk about that and what the importance of the DEP has been for you.
So the donor engagement plan will be a piece that I always use in fundraising wherever I'm at, because I know it works. If you're willing to follow the plan, it will work. The challenge becomes you're living in two different areas. You have kind of the Excel sheet of the plan, and then you have your CRM. And if that is one of the struggles that I know that even I face, is I would love for them to be connected within a CRM so I can have the future and the past all in kind of one reporting system.
Yes.
And I think it is hard for major gift fundraisers, but I'm a believer in it's 100% major gifts all the time. So don't let them get distracted into helping plan events or helping run events or just other ways that in a nonprofit world you can distract them. Say, no, your role is to manage this donor engagement plan, work with your donors, and make sure it's in the CRM. So you have to balance the two, but it is a challenge when you want everything in the CRM and then some of it's living outside of that.
Yeah. Well, we've been working with a lot of database companies lately who want to put the DEP into their database, like Salesforce. Donor Perfect is talking to us. We've CosVox, a lot of different donor databases are really interested in this because more and more people are saying, hey, we want to have a plan and we want to have it all in one place.
Right.
And typically donor databases have been great for direct response programs and really crappy for major gifts. And
do you have any recommendations on which ones work best for the DEP and what we're talking about? We have some questions here.
Which one works the best?
Which CRMs do you recommend? And then we have a bunch of questions and about 10 minutes to go. So we want to keep it moving.
Yeah, maybe we should just start taking questions since we.
Yeah, let's do that. I think because we're basically through the majority of it.
Yeah. So any recommendations on CRM or databases? Maybe Marnie, since you've been researching it, you might want to jump in with some thoughts.
So I have background with Salesforce, but we actually, our new CRM we're moving to is Virtuous. I think it was good for us. We're a smaller nonprofit. We're not kind of nationwide or worldwide, so that one worked for us.
Yeah, Virtuous is another one of those that's been talking to us about how to integrate the DEP into their system.
So back to you, Marnie, on this one. In addition to individualized plans and meaningful connections, we track total activities by channel, phone, email, mail, face-to-face, including totals overall and by unique donors reached for caseload coverage, without arbitrary activities goals, but more as an FYI for each MGO. What are your thoughts about that?
I don't know what I would do with the whole data. If you said, oh, well, my caseload, I have 75 that like to be connected by email and 25 by phone. I don't know what I would do with that full set of data, because it's so individualized for donors that when you're kind of working your caseload and some are going to drop off and new ones are going to roll on. So that information is always kind of be changing based on what your donor wants. So for me, I wouldn't want to know how many like to be connected via email, because it's so donor specific that you have a plan for each of your individualized donors.
Thank you. Got a lot of questions here about the donor engagement plan, the DEP. I'll start with you, Jeff. How long does it take to make a DEP? I'm a first year with an org, don't know my donors well enough. Do I start with donors now? Do I wait? Talk a little bit about that.
Well, once you have as your donors are qualified, you would put them into the DEP. That's number one, because until they're qualified, they're not put into your portfolio. But to actually create a DEP, I've worked with major gift officers, and we sat down and knocked it out in half a day for the whole year, all 150 donors, 12 months. That
was quick.
It's not actually as hard as you think. And if you have all the right pieces, it's actually something that you can do fairly easily. But it's just a matter of sitting down and focused on it.
And Jeff, when I think to that, I think the way to start that plan is find the easy spots. When's their birthday? Put that in your plan, so you can find some of the easy ones to get you started, and then the ones where you're kind of moving them through meaningful connections. If you get stuck there,
Karen, it would be good if you put a link to the resource tab, because there's a white paper on how to create a donor impact plan, or donor engagement plan, and then also the link to actually download a DEP if you want to do that. There's a free one that you can just download and start planning with your donors.
Great. So Richard, talk a little bit about, what do I do? You say a caseload of 150 qualified donors. What if I have multiple hats and I'm not 100% major gifts? How do I do that?
Well, we don't like that you have to do that, but anyway, so let's say you have 100 major gift donors and 50 planned gift donors. And we would basically say 150 qualified donors is a full-time thing. So if you have only 100, then 2/3 of the time you'd be doing major gifts, and 1/3 of the time you'd be doing planned gifts. I mean, generally that would be the concept.
Okay, thank you. Let's see here. There's so many good questions. Holly's asking, should metrics tracked be the same for mid-level officers versus major gift officers, or are there any important differences? Jeff, talk a little bit about that.
There are differences. I just don't happen to have them in front of me, but there definitely is differences, because with donors, you're looking at individuals, and with mid-level, you're looking at tiers of donors, and your plans are with a tier of donor versus individuals. And one of the metrics, of course, that's different in major gifts and mid-level is in mid-level, you're looking to move people into major gifts. So if you have a baseline, then you're trying to take that and move them up. And so what we have found is those organizations that don't have a mid-level program, anywhere between 0.2 to 1.2% of donors from mid-level move on their own, just without a program. With a good mid-level program, that moves up to 3 to 3.5%. And we've also
Wow.
seen it up to 4% of donors move
Mhm.
into major gift programs. So that would be a metric. So there are different metrics, and depending, because we're talking about individual one-on-one with major gifts versus groups of donors with mid-level.
I know with our major gifts, we talk about maybe 32 meaningful connections a month. Marnie, how do you track how many what is a reasonable amount of meaningful connections, and how are you tracking that?
Oh, well, from a tracking, I mean, honestly, it's just knowing the donor. So I don't know that I have the perfect answer for that, but as long as they know who the donor is and what they care about, and we can see that there's movement being made, I don't necessarily say 32 a month. Maybe there's some data behind that one, but I'm looking at who are the donors, have we connected with them in this way in the past, and kind of where they're at, and then start to, kind of move the needle that way.
Mhm.
I get a little bit nervous just about the giving it an exact number. So when you have an exact number, I don't want anybody to feel like they have to hit that. So that we're going to say, oh yeah, we had 32 and actually 4 of them weren't really. Like, trust the process, start believing in yourself, and be honest. And as long as there's that open communication, if you get 25, but we're working the plan, I'm okay with that.
Yep, that's good.
Yeah, I like that.
We have a lot of questions about qualifying, Richard. So we have a 7-step qualifying process. I put a link to our white papers, download that. A lot of questions are, how many times do I reach out? And should I have those donors on my caseload if they're highest level of giving? Richard, speak to that quickly. We have about 3 minutes.
Yeah, but qualifying is basically, there's 2/3 of your donors don't want to talk to you. So that's a fact. So the idea is to figure out which 1/3 does. That's what qualifying is. You do not want a bunch of non-talkers, non-engagers on the caseload. You don't want any of them on there. That's the point of qualifying. So I would suggest you download go to the link and get that information in terms of how to do that, what it is, and all that. But the big point is that 2/3 of your donors do not want to relate on a more personal level. So find the other third, and that's the ones that you put on your caseload.
All right. Marnie, talk a little bit about your management of this. I think that would be a great way to close us out. So we're talking about, we want to have meaningful connections, what they are. We've talked a good bit about it, but what does it look like actually? You've sat down with me today. You're managing me as your MGO. What does that look like and sound like?
So the first thing, we're both looking at the same document. And if you're qualifying, I'll say, hey, tell me who you've qualified this week. Tell me, what did you learn? What was that story? What was the why? What did that donor say to make you say they're qualified and we're going to move on? The other piece is never look at just total giving. Like, oh, this donor is our biggest donor. Well, if they don't want to talk to you, don't add them to your case, to your caseload, and just
Exactly.
and then what is the plan? How are we working that plan? What is the goal? And making sure that we're looking year over year, the last 3 fiscal years, we look at what their giving was, and then we develop that goal. And sometimes that's hard to develop it at the front end, but look at where the donor is at and go case by case, look at that donor. So we'll go through all of those pieces, and it's really keeping the donor at the forefront, not the organization. That when you let them know how they made a difference, it is not look at what we're doing as an organization. It is changing that word, changing that language, and just coaching through following your plan. How did the donor make a difference, and thanking them.
Thank you all. There's so much here, so many great questions, you all. Thank you for sending them in. We will be looking at those for future blogs. Trust me, we really listen and hear what you all are curious about. And Marnie, you've just been incredible with all of your real life examples. A lot of people are even some of your team members are on there giving you a shout out on the chat box. So thank you, Richard and Jeff and Marnie, for this incredible webinar today. And just as a reminder, you will receive a recording of the webinar and of the PowerPoint slides as well via email today. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you all in the future again. Everyone have a great week.
See you later.